Sarah Martinez walked through the small grocery store in Cedar Falls, Iowa, her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. At 34, she had become invisible to most people in this quiet town. Nobody looked twice at the woman with tired eyes who stocked shelves and worked the night shift at the local diner. Her calloused hands moved efficiently as she arranged canned goods, the same routine she had followed for 8 long years. The morning sun filtered through dusty windows as Sarah finished her shift. She drove home in her beat-up Honda Civic, past the elementary school where children played during recess. Some of them waved at her, knowing her as the nice lady who sometimes brought them free cookies from the diner. Sarah waved back with a gentle smile that never quite reached her eyes. Her small apartment above the hardware store was simple and clean. A single bed, a tiny kitchen, and walls decorated with landscape paintings she had bought at garage sales. What nobody knew was that hidden behind a loose floorboard under her bed lay a metal box containing flight certificates, military commendations, and photographs of a younger Sarah standing proudly next to fighter jets. Sarah had once been captain, Sarah Martinez of the United States Air Force, one of the few female pilots qualified to fly the most advanced aircraft in the military. She had logged over 2,000 flight hours, completed 3 overseas deployments, and earned the respect of every pilot in her squadron. Her hands, now rough from years of manual labor, had once controlled machines worth millions of dollars as they soared through clouds at impossible speeds. 8 years ago, everything changed during what should have been a routine training mission. Sarah was flying a brand new F-35 Lightning II when a mechanical failure caused the aircraft to malfunction. The investigation that followed revealed design flaws that the manufacturer had tried to hide. When Sarah tried to report the truth about what really happened that day, she found herself facing pressure from powerful people who wanted the incident covered up. The military offered her a choice: stay quiet about the mechanical failures and accept a promotion to a desk job, or face a court-martial on fabricated charges that would destroy her career and reputation. Sarah chose a third option that nobody expected. She quietly resigned from the Air Force, took her savings, and disappeared into small-town America, where nobody would think to look for a former fighter pilot. For 8 years, Sarah had successfully buried her past. She told people in Cedar Falls that she had worked in maintenance for an airline company before moving to Iowa for a quieter life. The lie came easily after so much practice. She learned to hide her natural confidence, to speak softly instead of with the commanding voice that had once given orders to flight crews. She taught herself to appear ordinary, unremarkable, forgettable. But some skills never fade completely. Sarah still woke up every morning at 500 hours out of habit. She still scanned the sky whenever she heard aircraft engines, automatically, identifying the type and model by sound alone. Her eyes still tracked the movement of birds with the precision of someone trained to spot threats from miles away. Most telling of all, she still dreamed of flying almost every night. The people of Cedar Falls saw what they expected to see: a quiet single woman who worked hard and kept to herself. Mrs. Chen at the grocery store sometimes worried that Sarah seemed lonely. Bill, who owned the hardware store downstairs, appreciated that she always paid her rent on time and never caused trouble. The regular customers at the diner knew her as someone who remembered their usual orders and always had a kind word when they seemed down. None of them could have imagined that this unassuming woman checking their groceries or serving their coffee had once flown combat missions over hostile territory. They had no idea that she could calculate wind speed and direction just by watching leaves move in the breeze, or that she automatically noted every exit and potential escape route whenever she entered a building. Sarah had become an expert at living a double life, but the weight of her secret grew heavier with each passing year. Sometimes she caught herself staring at military aircraft flying overhead, her heart racing with a mixture of longing and pain. She missed the feeling of breaking through clouds into brilliant sunlight, the rush of takeoff, and the quiet precision required for a perfect landing. The loneliness was the hardest part. Sarah had learned not to get too close to anyone, because real friendship required honesty she could not afford. She attended community events and church functions, always friendly but never intimate. She dated occasionally but never seriously, knowing that any real relationship would eventually require explanations she could not give. On quiet nights, Sarah would sometimes take out the hidden box and look through her old photographs. There she was, young and proud in her flight suit, surrounded by colleagues who had trusted her with their lives. She would run her fingers over her commendations and wonder if she had made the right choice all those years ago. The woman in those photographs seemed like a stranger now, someone brave and confident who belonged to a different world. As Sarah prepared for another ordinary day in her carefully constructed ordinary life, she had no idea that events were already in motion that would soon make her secret impossible to keep. The skills she had worked so hard to bury were about to become desperately needed, and the quiet life she had built in Cedar Falls was about to be shattered forever. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning when Sarah noticed more military aircraft than usual crossing the Iowa sky. As she walked to work at the diner, she automatically identified them. C-130 transport planes, flying in formation, toward the east. Her trained eye caught details that others missed. They were flying lower than normal transport altitude and maintaining tight formation patterns used for rapid deployment scenarios. At the diner, the morning news played on the radio. Small television mounted in the corner. Sarah barely glanced at it while pouring coffee for the early customers, but certain words made her freeze mid-pour. International crisis, military response, and pilot shortage. The coffee cup overflowed as Sarah's attention snapped to the screen where a news anchor was discussing escalating tensions in Eastern Europe. "Looks like trouble brewing over there," commented Frank, a retired farmer who came in every morning for coffee and eggs. "Good thing it's not our problem." Sarah nodded absently while cleaning up the spilled coffee, but her mind was racing. The news report mentioned that several NATO allies were requesting immediate air support, and the United States was struggling to provide adequate pilot coverage for the expanded operations. Throughout the day, Sarah found herself paying closer attention to news updates. Between serving customers and cleaning tables, she pieced together a picture that made her increasingly uneasy. A small nation had been invaded by a larger neighbor, and the conflict was rapidly expanding. International law demanded response, but military resources were stretched thin after years of budget cuts and personnel reductions. That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment with her laptop, something she rarely used except for paying bills online. She found herself searching for military news websites, reading detailed reports about pilot shortages and aircraft deployment. According to several sources, the Air Force was desperately short of experienced pilots qualified to fly the most advanced fighter jets. Many had left military service for better-paying civilian airline jobs, and training new pilots took years. The irony was not lost on Sarah. Here was exactly the kind of situation where her skills and experience would be invaluable. Yet she was hiding in a small Iowa town serving breakfast to farmers and shopkeepers. She closed the laptop and tried to push the thoughts away, but sleep would not come. All night she lay awake listening to the sound of military aircraft passing overhead, their engines growing more frequent as the hours passed. The next morning brought news that changed everything. President's emergency address interrupted regular programming as Sarah was opening the diner. The situation overseas had deteriorated rapidly during the night. A direct attack on an American military base had killed 17 service members, and Congress had authorized immediate military response. The president announced that the United States was officially at war. Sarah's hands trembled as she unlocked the diner door. War meant that every qualified pilot would be needed. It meant that the military would be searching through databases of former service members, looking for anyone with the skills to help. It meant that her carefully hidden past might not stay hidden much longer. The morning customers arrived with worried faces and anxious conversations. Everyone was talking about the war, about their sons and daughters in the military, about what this might mean for their small community. Sarah moved through her routine mechanically, pouring coffee and taking orders while her mind calculated flight patterns and weapon systems loadouts with the automatic precision of her former training. Around noon, a black sedan with government plates pulled up outside the diner. Sarah watched through the window as two people in military uniforms got out and adjusted their service caps. Her heart began pounding as she recognized the insignia of Air Force personnel officers. They were not here by accident. The bell above, The door chimed as they entered, and Sarah forced herself to continue wiping down tables as if nothing had changed. The younger officer, a lieutenant, approached the counter while the older one, a colonel, remained near the door. Their eyes swept the small diner with the professional assessment Sarah remembered from her own military training. "Excuse me," the lieutenant said politely. "We're looking for someone who might have information about a former Air Force pilot named Sarah Martinez. We understand she might have connections to this area." Sarah's hand stilled on the table she was cleaning, but she did not look up immediately. When she did raise her eyes, she kept her expression carefully neutral. "Sorry," she said in the soft voice she had cultivated over 8 years of hiding. "That name doesn't ring a bell. Lots of people pass through here, though. Maybe try the post office or city hall." The lie came easily, but she could feel the colonel's sharp gaze studying her face. The officers thanked her and left, but Sarah knew they would be back. Military personnel officers were trained to be thorough, and something in the colonel's expression told her that her performance had not been entirely convincing. As soon as their car disappeared down Main Street, Sarah rushed to the back office and called her manager to say she felt sick and needed to leave early. At home, Sarah paced her small apartment like a caged animal. She pulled out the hidden box and stared at her old identification cards and flight certifications. For 8 years, she had successfully become invisible, but war had a way of making everyone visible again. The military would keep searching until they found every qualified pilot, especially those with her level of training and experience. That evening, Sarah drove to the small airport outside of town where crop dusters and private planes were kept. She had avoided this place for years, knowing it would be too tempting, but tonight she needed to think clearly. She sat in her car at the edge of the runway, watching small planes take off and land as the sun set behind the Iowa cornfields. Crop duster pilot named Jim, who occasionally came into the diner, recognized her car and walked over. "Never seen you out here before, Sarah," he said with friendly curiosity. "You interested in flying? I could take you up sometime if you want." Sarah smiled and thanked him, but declined. If only he knew that she had logged more flight hours than he could imagine in aircraft that made his small plane look like a toy. As darkness fell and the airport grew quiet, Sarah remained in her car, wrestling with the decision she had hoped never to face. The country was at war, and pilots were desperately needed. Her skills could save lives and potentially help end the conflict more quickly. But returning to military service would mean giving up the quiet life she had built and facing the powerful people who had forced her into hiding 8 years ago. More than that, it would mean trusting a system that had betrayed her once before. Sarah had learned to be self-reliant, to trust only herself, to never again depend on institutions that might sacrifice her for political convenience. The thought of putting on a uniform again, of taking orders from superiors who might once again pressure her to lie about what she witnessed, made her stomach clench with anxiety. But as she sat there in the darkness, listening to the distant sound of military transport planes continuing their eastward journey, Sarah could not escape the knowledge that people were dying while she hid in small-town Iowa. The question that would haunt her through another sleepless night was whether her desire for safety and anonymity was worth the cost in other people's lives. Sarah's decision was made for her 3 days later when she arrived at the diner to find the same black sedan parked outside, along with 2 additional military vehicles. This time, the officers had not come alone. Through the window, she could see Colonel Harrison, the older officer from the previous visit, sitting at her usual customer table with a thick folder spread in front of him. Taking a deep breath, Sarah pushed open the diner door and walked directly to his table. There was no point in continuing the charade when they clearly already knew who she was. "Colonel Harrison," she said quietly, using his name from the insignia she had memorized. "I assume you're not here for the breakfast special?" The colonel looked up with the hint of a smile. "Captain Martinez, or should I say former Captain Martinez, please sit down." Sarah remained standing, her arms crossed, but the colonel's next words made her knees weak. "We know about the F-35 incident 8 years ago. We also know you were right about the mechanical failures, and we know why you really resigned." Sarah sank into the chair across from him. her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. For 8 years, she had believed that her former superiors had buried the truth about the aircraft malfunction to protect the manufacturer and avoid embarrassment. She had assumed that speaking up would have destroyed her career and possibly resulted in criminal charges. The investigation was reopened 2 years after you left. Colonel Harrison continued, his voice gentle but serious. The defense contractor involved was found guilty of deliberately hiding known defects in multiple aircraft systems. 3 executives went to prison, and the company paid over $2 billion in fines and penalties. Your testimony, which we kept sealed at the time, became the foundation for the entire case. Sarah stared at him in shock. But General Morrison said that if I pursued my report, I would face court-martial for making false accusations against defense contractors. He said my career would be over, and that I might face prison time for interfering with national security contracts. Colonel Harrison's expression darkened. General Morrison was receiving consulting fees from the same defense contractor. He's currently serving a 10-year sentence in federal prison for corruption and conspiracy. Captain Martinez, you were never in danger of prosecution. You were being intimidated by a corrupt officer who was trying to protect his own financial interests. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. For 8 years, she had lived in hiding, believing she was a fugitive from military justice. She had given up her career, her identity, and her life's passion based on lies told by a criminal who was now in prison. She had spent nearly a decade serving coffee and stocking shelves when she could have been flying and serving her country. Why? Didn't anyone tell me? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why didn't anyone come looking for me to explain what really happened? We tried, the colonel replied. But you disappeared very thoroughly. It took us 3 years just to figure out that you were still alive and hadn't left the country. When we finally tracked you to Cedar Falls, we decided to respect your choice to live quietly. You had been treated badly by the system, and if you wanted to remain a civilian, that was your right. Sarah felt tears threatening for the first time in years. Then why are you here now? Colonel Harrison leaned forward, his expression becoming urgent. Because the country is at war, and we desperately need pilots with your qualifications. Sarah, you're one of only 37 people in the entire United States who are fully qualified to fly the new F-35C variant in combat conditions. Right now, we have 18 of those aircraft sitting on carrier decks with no one qualified to fly them. He opened his folder and spread out photographs and technical specifications. The enemy has deployed advanced surface-to-air missile systems that our older aircraft cannot penetrate. We need the F-35C's stealth capabilities and advanced electronics to protect our ground forces and establish air superiority. Without experienced pilots like you, those aircraft are just very expensive hangar decorations. Sarah studied the photographs, automatically analyzing the aircraft configurations and weapon systems. Despite 8 years away from military aviation, the technical details came flooding back with crystal clarity. She could see immediately why standard fighters would be ineffective against the defensive systems shown in the intelligence photos. I haven't flown in 8 years, Sarah said, though, even as she spoke, she knew the excuse was weak. Flying was like riding a bicycle for someone with her level of training. The skills might be rusty, but they never truly disappeared. We can get you current again in 2 weeks, Colonel Harrison replied confidently. The training facility at Nellis has a specialized program for returning experienced pilots. You would spend 1 week in simulators and 1 week in actual aircraft, then deploy immediately to the USS Gerald Ford in the Mediterranean. Sarah looked around the small diner where she had worked for so many years. Mrs. Patterson was cooking, eggs on the grill, humming the same tune she always hummed during the breakfast rush. Frank was reading his newspaper and drinking his 3rd cup of coffee, completely unaware that his waitress was discussing military strategy with an Air Force colonel. What about my life here? Sarah asked. I have responsibilities, people who depend on me. We've already spoken with your employers, the colonel said. Mrs. Patterson has been told that you're being called back to serve your country in a time of crisis. She said, and I quote, "That girl always seemed like she had something special about her. Tell her to go save the world and come back safe." He paused. As for your apartment, we can arrange for storage of your belongings and cover your rent for up to 6 months. The offer was everything Sarah had secretly dreamed about for 8 years, yet the reality of it terrified her. She had grown comfortable with her quiet, safe existence. The thought of returning to the high-stakes world of military aviation, especially in combat conditions, made her heart race with both excitement and fear. "There's something else," Colonel Harrison said, his voice becoming more serious. "The current situation is more dangerous than the public knows. Intelligence reports suggest that the enemy has acquired advanced radar-guided missiles from hostile nations. They've already shot down 6 of our F-16s and 4 F-18s. Pilot casualties are mounting and morale is suffering." Sarah felt the familiar surge of protective anger that had always driven her best flying. The thought of young pilots dying because they lacked the proper equipment and training was intolerable. These were people like her younger self, brave and dedicated but potentially outmatched by superior enemy technology. "If I agree to this," Sarah said slowly, "I want certain guarantees. I want complete honesty about mission parameters and aircraft capabilities. I want full access to intelligence reports that affect flight safety. And I want assurance that if I identify any safety issues or equipment problems, my reports will be taken seriously and acted upon immediately." Colonel Harrison nodded without hesitation. "You have my word, and the word of General Patricia Chen, who is now commanding the Air Force's combat operations. General Chen specifically requested that we find you. She was part of the team that investigated the original F-35 incident, and she has tremendous respect for your integrity and skills." Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, Colonel Harrison saw something that had been missing from her expression for 8 years. The confident determination of a fighter pilot ready for battle. "When do we leave?" she asked. Colonel Harrison smiled and closed his folder. "There's a transport plane waiting at Des Moines International Airport. If you can be ready in 2 hours, you can be at Nellis Air Force Base by tonight." He stood up and extended his hand. "Welcome back to the Air Force, Captain. Martinez, your country needs you." 2 weeks later, Sarah stood on the deck of the USS Gerald Ford, watching the Mediterranean sunrise paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The massive aircraft carrier cut through calm waters, while F-35C Lightning II fighters lined the flight deck in perfect formation. After 8 years of Iowa cornfields and quiet small-town mornings, the controlled chaos of naval aviation operations felt like coming home to a language she had forgotten she was fluent in. The retraining at Nellis Air Force Base had been intense, but exhilarating. Despite her fears about being rusty, Sarah's muscle memory and instincts had returned with startling speed. Within 3 days, she was flying better than some pilots who had never left active duty. Her instructors were impressed by her precision and her ability to adapt quickly to the upgraded systems in the newer F-35C variants. "Like riding a bicycle," had been the comment from Major Rodriguez, her primary instructor. "Except this bicycle costs $90 million and can break the sound barrier." Sarah had laughed, feeling truly happy for the first time in years. The cockpit of an F-35 felt more natural to her than the small apartment above the hardware store in Cedar Falls. Now, standing on the carrier deck in her flight suit, Sarah felt the familiar pre-mission mixture of excitement and focused concentration. Today would be her first combat sortie in 8 years, a reconnaissance mission over hostile territory to gather intelligence on enemy air defenses. She would be flying with Lieutenant Commander Mike "Shark" Thompson, a younger pilot who had looked skeptical when introduced to the diner waitress-turned-fighter pilot. That skepticism had vanished during their first training flight together. Sarah's experience and tactical knowledge had impressed even the veteran carrier pilots who had initially viewed her return with curiosity and doubt. Word had spread quickly through the ship that the mysterious new pilot flew with the precision of someone who had been doing it her entire life. "Ready for this, Captain?" Lieutenant Commander Thompson asked as they walked toward their aircraft. Sarah nodded, her hands automatically checking her gear and reviewing the mission parameters in her mind. The target area was heavily defended, with multiple surface-to-air missile sites and enemy fighter patrols. Intelligence reports suggested that several American aircraft had been lost in this region, making the mission both crucial and dangerous. The F-35C Lightning II was a marvel of modern aviation technology. As Sarah climbed into the cockpit, she felt the comfortable embrace of advanced systems and familiar controls. The aircraft's stealth capabilities and sophisticated electronics would allow them to penetrate enemy airspace undetected, but success depended on pilot skill and experience as much as technology. Pre-flight checks were completed with the efficiency Sarah remembered from her younger days. Every system functioned perfectly, every indicator showed green, every calculation confirmed optimal conditions for the mission. As the catapult officer signaled for launch preparation, Sarah felt the old thrill of anticipation that had first drawn her to military aviation. The catapult launch from a carrier deck was still one of the most intense experiences in aviation. Sarah felt herself pressed back into her seat as the aircraft accelerated from 0 to 150 miles per hour in less than 3 seconds. The F-35C shot off the end of the flight deck and climbed rapidly into the morning sky, followed seconds later by Thompson's aircraft. Flying over the Mediterranean, Sarah was struck by how much she had missed the freedom and perspective that only came from being alone in the sky. Below, the world looked peaceful and beautiful, with no sign of the conflict raging on distant shores. At 30,000 feet, national borders became meaningless lines, and the problems of earthbound humans seemed small and manageable. "How does it feel to be back?" Thompson's voice crackled through her headset as they flew in formation toward the target area. "Like I never left," Sarah replied honestly. The controls responded to her touch with the precision she remembered, and the aircraft's systems integrated seamlessly with her thought processes. 8 years of serving coffee had not diminished her ability to think and react at the speed required for modern air combat. As they approached the edge of hostile territory, both pilots activated their aircraft stealth systems and reduced communications to essential mission parameters. The F-35's advanced radar and electronic warfare capabilities immediately began detecting and analyzing enemy air defenses. Sarah's cockpit display showed a complex web of missile sites, radar installations, and patrol routes. "Multiple SAM sites. Active," Thompson reported quietly. "Looks like intelligence was accurate about their defensive improvements." Sarah studied her own displays, automatically calculating flight paths that would minimize exposure to enemy detection systems. Her years of experience allowed her to see patterns and possibilities that a less experienced pilot might miss. They penetrated enemy airspace without detection, the F-35's stealth technology performing exactly as designed. Sarah felt the old satisfaction of a perfectly executed mission plan as they gathered crucial intelligence on enemy positions and capabilities. The information they were collecting would save American lives and help military planners develop more effective strategies. 30 minutes into the reconnaissance mission, Sarah's threat warning system suddenly activated. "Shark, I'm showing missile lock from an unknown contact," she reported calmly. "New threat not on our intelligence reports." Her training kicked in automatically as she analyzed the threat signature and began evasive maneuvers. "Copy that, I'm seeing the same thing," Thompson replied, his voice tight with concentration. "This is different from anything in our briefings. Looks like they've got new systems we haven't encountered before." Sarah's mind raced through possibilities as she guided her aircraft through a series of evasive maneuvers designed to break the missile lock. The enemy had apparently acquired more advanced weapons than intelligence had indicated, making the mission significantly more dangerous than planned. This was exactly the kind of situation where experience and judgment were more valuable than technology. "I'm going to try something," Sarah announced, pulling her aircraft into a steep climbing turn that should have been impossible for an enemy missile to follow. Years of training and combat experience guided her hands as she pushed the F-35 to its performance limits. The missile lock indicator flickered and disappeared, confirming that her evasive action had been successful. "Nice flying," Thompson said with obvious admiration. "Where did you learn that maneuver?" "Long story," Sarah replied, already analyzing the threat data they had collected. The enemy's new missile systems were more capable than anyone had realized, which explained why so many American aircraft had been lost recently. This intelligence would be crucial for protecting future missions and developing effective countermeasures. The return flight to the carrier passed without incident. But Sarah's mind was working furiously to process what they had discovered. The enemy was more technologically advanced than intelligence reports had suggested, and American pilots were facing threats they had not been trained to counter. Lives were being lost because of intelligence gaps that better reconnaissance could help fill. As they approached the USS Gerald Ford, Sarah felt the familiar satisfaction of a successful mission, combined with the sobering knowledge that the conflict was more dangerous than anyone had publicly acknowledged. The skills she had developed over years of training in combat were not just useful, they were essential for protecting younger pilots who lacked her experience with advanced threats. Landing on a carrier deck remained one of the most challenging aspects of naval aviation, requiring split-second timing and absolute precision. Sarah brought her F-35C down perfectly, the aircraft's tailhook catching the arrest wire exactly as intended. As her aircraft came to a stop on the carrier deck, she felt the deep satisfaction of a job well done and the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. 3 weeks into her deployment aboard the USS Gerald Ford, Sarah had become something of a legend among the carrier's air wing. Her mission success rate was perfect, and her tactical innovations had already been adopted as standard procedures for dealing with the enemy's advanced missile systems. More importantly, not a single pilot flying under her guidance had been lost to enemy action. The breakthrough came during what should have been a routine strike mission against enemy supply depots. Sarah was leading a 4-aircraft formation when her threat detection systems identified something that made her blood run cold. A new type of radar signature that matched classified intelligence reports about experimental enemy weapon systems. All aircraft, this is lead, Sarah transmitted calmly. I'm detecting an unknown threat pattern at bearing 270. Recommend we abort current approach and reassess. Her years of experience had taught her to trust her instincts, even when the evidence was subtle. Lead, this is control, came the response from the carrier's Combat Information Center. We show no threats in that area. You are cleared to continue. The mission is planned. Sarah felt a familiar chill of recognition. This was exactly the kind of situation that had led to her confrontation with General Morrison 8 years earlier. Pressure to ignore potential safety issues for the sake of mission objectives. Control. I am observing anomalous radar patterns consistent with advanced surface-to-air missile systems, Sarah replied firmly. Request permission to modify approach vector for enhanced survivability. She was not going to make the same mistake twice by allowing political or operational pressure to override her professional judgment about flight safety. Lieutenant Commander Thompson, flying as her wingman, came on a private channel. Captain, I'm not seeing what you're seeing on my displays. Are you sure about this? His voice carried doubt, but also respect for her experience and proven track record. Sarah took a deep breath and made a decision that could end her newly restored military career. All aircraft, this is lead. We are aborting the current mission profile and returning to base immediately. I am taking full responsibility for this decision. She banked her aircraft sharply away from the target area, hoping that her wingmen would follow her lead. For a terrifying moment, Sarah flew alone as the other 3 pilots hesitated between following their flight leader's orders and completing their assigned mission. Then, one by one, they turned to follow her home. Lieutenant Commander Thompson was the first, followed by the 2 younger pilots who had learned to trust Sarah's judgment over the past weeks. Lead, this is control. You are ordered to return to target and complete the mission, came the angry voice from the carrier. Your flight is showing no valid threats in the target area. Sarah could hear the frustration and authority in the communication, but she had been in this situation before and knew the potential consequences of backing down. Control, this is lead. We are returning to base due to unacceptable risk levels. In the target area, Sarah replied evenly. Full mission debrief will follow upon landing. She maintained her course toward the carrier, hoping she had made the right decision and that her career would survive what was certain to be an uncomfortable conversation with her superiors. The landing aboard the USS Gerald Ford was tense, with Sarah knowing that she would face immediate questioning about her decision to abort the mission. As she climbed out of her cockpit, she saw Admiral Rebecca Martinez waiting on the flight deck with several other senior officers. The Admiral's expression was unreadable, but Sarah recognized the body language of someone preparing for a difficult conversation. "Captain Martinez, my ready room now," Admiral Martinez said without preamble. Sarah followed the Admiral through the ship's corridors, past curious sailors and officers who clearly sensed that something significant was happening. The ready room was small and cramped, filled with tactical displays and communication equipment that remained active around the clock. "Explain to me why you aborted a critical mission based on threats that our intelligence systems could not detect," Admiral Martinez said, settling behind her desk with the air of someone prepared to hear a very convincing explanation or end a career. Sarah pulled up the radar data from her flight on a portable display device. "Ma'am, I observed patterns in the electromagnetic spectrum that match classified reports about experimental enemy missile systems. The signature was subtle, but consistent with advanced radar-guided weapons that can defeat our current countermeasures." Admiral Martinez studied the data for several minutes, comparing Sarah's observations with intelligence reports displayed on multiple screens around the ready room. Sarah waited silently, knowing that her future depended on whether her superior would trust her judgment over standard operational procedures. "These patterns you identified," the Admiral said finally, "they match intelligence reports that were classified above your clearance level. How did you know to look for these specific signatures?" Her voice carried curiosity rather than accusation, which Sarah took as an encouraging sign. "Experience, ma'am," Sarah replied honestly. 8 years ago, I encountered similar radar anomalies during training flights that later proved to be evidence of equipment malfunctions. I learned to pay attention to subtle patterns that others might dismiss as electronic noise or equipment glitches. Admiral Martinez nodded slowly. "The F-35 incident that ended your first military career. I've read the full classified report, Captain Martinez. Your observations about mechanical failures were dismissed by corrupt officers, but they ultimately saved lives when the truth came out." She paused, studying Sarah's service record displayed on another screen. "Ma'am, I made the decision to abort because I believed my pilots were flying into an unacceptable risk situation," Sarah said. "If I was wrong, I take full responsibility for compromising the mission. But if I was right, I may have prevented the loss of 4 aircraft and 4 experienced pilots." The Admiral's expression remained neutral, but Sarah detected a hint of approval in her eyes. "Captain, 30 minutes after you aborted your mission, enemy forces launched a massive surface-to-air missile barrage from the exact location you identified as dangerous. They fired 17 advanced missiles in a coordinated attack pattern designed to destroy multiple aircraft simultaneously." Sarah felt a wave of relief mixed with vindication. Her instincts and experience had been correct, and her decision to trust them had potentially saved 4 lives. More importantly, it demonstrated that the enemy possessed capabilities that current intelligence assessments had underestimated. "The enemy systems you detected are more advanced than anything in our threat database," Admiral Martinez continued. "They appear to be experimental weapons provided by hostile nations, designed specifically to counter our stealth aircraft. Your ability to detect these systems gives us a significant tactical advantage." Admiral Martinez stood and extended her hand. "Captain Martinez, effective immediately, you are being promoted to Major and assigned as our primary threat assessment officer for all air operations in this theater. Your job will be to identify enemy capabilities that our standard intelligence systems might miss, and to develop tactical procedures to counter advanced threats." Sarah felt a surge of professional satisfaction unlike anything she had experienced in years. Not only had her judgment been vindicated, but she was being entrusted with responsibility that could directly impact the safety of every pilot in the combat theater. "Thank you, ma'am," Sarah replied, shaking the Admiral's hand firmly. "I won't let you down." The promotion meant more than just increased rank and responsibility. It represented complete vindication of the principles that had cost her so much 8 years earlier. Admiral Martinez smiled for the first time during their conversation. "Major Martinez, I have a feeling you're going to revolutionize how we conduct air operations in hostile environments. Your combination of tactical experience and analytical skills is exactly what we need to stay ahead of rapidly evolving enemy capabilities." Over the following days, Sarah threw herself into her new role with the passion and dedication that had originally made her an exceptional pilot. She spent hours analyzing threat data, interviewing returning pilots about their observations, and developing new tactics for dealing with advanced enemy systems. Her recommendations were implemented immediately, and the results were dramatic. Mission success rates improved significantly, while aircraft losses dropped to nearly zero. Younger pilots who had been struggling with the dangerous and unpredictable enemy defenses began succeeding under Sarah's tactical guidance. She developed training programs that taught pilots to recognize subtle threat indicators and respond with evasive maneuvers that she had perfected through years of experience. Most importantly, Sarah discovered that her years in hiding had given her a unique perspective on problem solving. Living as a civilian had taught her to think creatively and adapt quickly to changing circumstances. These skills, combined with her military training and combat experience, made her exceptionally effective at developing innovative solutions to complex tactical challenges. Lieutenant Commander Thompson, who had become one of Sarah's most trusted colleagues, summed up the transformation during a late-night conversation in the ship's wardroom. "You've changed everything about how we approach these missions," he told her. "6 weeks ago we were losing pilots every week and barely completing our objectives. Now we're dominating the airspace and coming home safely every time." Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction, but also a growing awareness that her success in this role was attracting attention from much higher levels of command. Encrypted communications from Pentagon officials were becoming more frequent, and she had been informed that her tactical innovations were being studied for implementation throughout the entire Air Force and Navy. The irony was not lost on her that the same instincts and judgment that had forced her into 8 years of exile were now being celebrated and adopted as standard military procedure. The difference was that she now worked for leaders who valued honesty and expertise over political convenience, and who understood that pilot safety was more important than protecting the reputation of defense contractors. As Sarah stood on the carrier deck one evening, watching the sunset paint the Mediterranean sky in brilliant colors, she reflected on the strange journey that had brought her from serving coffee in Iowa to revolutionizing military aviation tactics. The scared and betrayed woman who had fled the Air Force 8 years ago had been replaced by someone stronger and wiser, someone who understood that sometimes the most important battles are fought not in the sky, but in the courage to stand up for what is right regardless of personal cost. 6 months after returning to military service, Major Sarah Martinez stood in the Pentagon briefing room facing the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Secretary of Defense, and several members of Congress. The small-town diner waitress who had once hidden from her past was now being asked to present her revolutionary tactical innovations to the highest levels of American military leadership. "Major Martinez," General Patricia Chen began, "your tactical assessment program has resulted in a 340% improvement in mission success rates and reduced pilot casualties by 89% in the Mediterranean theater. The Joint Chiefs want to understand how these innovations can be implemented across all combat operations worldwide." Sarah looked around the room at faces she recognized from news broadcasts and military publications. These were the same people who, 6 months ago, would never have imagined that a crucial strategic advantage would come from a woman who had been serving breakfast in rural Iowa. The transformation felt surreal, but Sarah had learned to trust in the power of expertise and dedication regardless of where they were found. "The key insight," Sarah explained, activating a large display screen, "is that modern threats evolve faster than traditional intelligence systems can track them. We need pilots who are trained not just to follow predetermined tactics, but to recognize and adapt to new threats in real time." The presentation included detailed analysis of enemy capabilities and American tactical responses that had evolved over her months of combat operations. Secretary of Defense Williams leaned forward with obvious interest. "Major, intelligence reports indicate that enemy forces have been sharing advanced weapons technology with hostile nations around the world. How scalable are your threat detection and response protocols?" Sarah had anticipated this question and had spent weeks developing a comprehensive answer. "Sir, the principles can be applied anywhere, but they require experienced pilots who understand both the technology and the psychology of aerial combat. We need to create training programs that teach intuitive threat recognition rather than just procedural responses to known threats. Over the next 2 hours, Sarah outlined a complete restructuring of how the American military approached air combat training and operations. Her recommendations were based on hard-won experience and innovative thinking that combined traditional military doctrine with creative problem-solving techniques she had developed during her years as a civilian. The questions from the assembled leadership were challenging and detailed, covering everything from budget implications to international strategic considerations. Sarah answered each one with the confidence of someone who had not only developed theoretical solutions, but had proven them effective in actual combat conditions. Major Martinez, Congresswoman Rodriguez said during the final question period, "Your story is remarkable. From military service to civilian life and back to military leadership. What lessons should we learn about how the military identifies and utilizes talent?" Sarah considered the question carefully before responding. "Ma'am, talent and expertise can be found in unexpected places and circumstances. The military's strength comes not just from its technology and organization, but from its ability to recognize and develop human potential, regardless of traditional career paths or conventional expectations." After the briefing concluded, General Chen approached Sarah privately. "Major, I want you to know that your tactical innovations are being implemented in combat theaters around the world. Early reports suggest that your methods are as effective in other regions as they have been in the Mediterranean." Sarah felt a deep sense of professional satisfaction, but also a growing awareness that her role was expanding beyond anything she had imagined when she first agreed to return to military service. "General, I'm honored to serve, but I want to make sure we don't lose sight of the individual pilots who make these tactics work. Success depends on training and supporting people, not just implementing procedures." 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself back at Nellis Air Force Base, but this time as the director of the newly created Advanced Tactical Assessment Center. Her mission was to train a new generation of pilots in threat recognition and adaptive response techniques, combining cutting-edge technology with the kind of intuitive expertise that could only come from real combat experience. The irony of her situation was not lost on Sarah as she walked through the same training facilities where she had refreshed her own skills months earlier. The woman who had spent 8 years hiding from her military past was now responsible for shaping the future of American air combat doctrine. Her first class of students included some of the most promising young pilots in the Air Force, along with experienced veterans who needed to learn new techniques for dealing with evolving threats. Sarah looked at their eager faces and saw younger versions of herself. Talented, dedicated people who deserved the best training and leadership she could provide. "Flying is both an art and a science," Sarah told her students during their first lecture. "You can master the science through study and practice, but the art comes from experience, intuition, and the courage to trust your judgment, even when it contradicts conventional wisdom." As weeks turned into months, Sarah's training program produced pilots who consistently outperformed their peers in both simulated and actual combat situations. Military leaders from allied nations began requesting access to her training methods, and Sarah found herself consulting on tactical innovations for international air forces. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when Sarah received a letter from Mrs. Patterson, her former employer at the diner in Cedar Falls. "Dear Sarah," it read, "we always knew you were special, but we had no idea you were a real-life hero. The whole town is proud of you, and we're keeping your table at the diner, ready for when you come home to visit." Sarah smiled as she read the letter, remembering the quiet life she had built in Iowa, and the good people who had unknowingly sheltered her during her years of exile. That life had taught her humility, patience, and the value of ordinary human connections, lessons that made her a better leader and a more effective teacher. Standing in her office at Nellis, surrounded by tactical displays and training schedules, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her from hiding her identity to becoming one of the most influential figures in modern military aviation. The scared woman who had fled from corruption and betrayal 8 years ago had been transformed into someone who understood that real courage meant standing up for truth and excellence regardless of personal cost. Her story had become legend within military circles. the diner waitress who revolutionized air combat tactics and proved that expertise and dedication could emerge from the most unexpected circumstances. But for Sarah, the most important lesson was simpler. Sometimes the skills and perspectives gained from the most difficult experiences in life become the foundation for the most meaningful contributions to the world. As she prepared for another day of training the next generation of pilots, Sarah Martinez, former fugitive, former waitress, and now Major Sarah Martinez, Director of Advanced Tactical Training, knew that she had finally found her true calling. The 8 years of hiding had not been wasted time, but rather preparation for a role that required not just technical expertise, but also the wisdom that comes from understanding both failure and redemption.